I'm Kathy Molly, and we're here to talk today about addiction and the unfortunate overdoses that are occurring. And my son Michael and Anthony, my son's brother Michael. So I'll
I'm Anthony. How you doing? I'm Michael's brother. I am also in recovery. I've been sober now for about 7 years, and so we're here, I guess, today to talk about him and recovery and different aspects of that that come along with it.
yeah, and just how addiction affects family, and hopefully to help other families understand what to look for and what resources and just how to navigate the system, although it's quite broken. So I'll start off by telling you about my son Michael, who just passed away 5 months ago from carfentanil and fentanyl poisoning. So he was 31 years old. He died just at the start of the COVID quarantines in March, on March 23rd. In the early morning, we found Michael passed away from a poisoning of these lethal drugs. So Michael, to tell a little bit about him, Michael was filled with life. He was quite the character, and I'll let Anthony tell you a little bit about his personality. Michael is Anthony's younger brother, so Michael is 4 years younger than Anthony, so 31, and Anthony's 35. I myself have been dealing with both of my son's addictions for 17 years now, starting with Anthony here, and then what we thought would never happen, and that would be Michael going into that addiction, disease of addiction as well. But Michael was pretty much one of those kids that was very giving, sweet and kind, just wasn't happy unless he was making you or someone else happy. He didn't like when other people weren't comfortable or unhappy. And I found out later after he passed away that that was more than I knew, even through grade school and high school, just into those adult years. So he was in high school, very involved in high school, football, baseball, basketball. He was much of a jock and very successful. He was the running back in the senior year and in the newspaper and so on and so forth. He then was recruited into Baldwin Wallace on a scholarship for football, but sort of that's when we noticed the changes in Michael. Michael had been so successful in high school. I often think that he just wasn't ready for the college years that weren't going to be based on stardom like he had, and I think that was hard after working so hard to get where he was. I'm going to let Anthony share a little bit about his brother, and then we can talk a little bit about what happened to Michael, and then maybe just go into things that Anthony can share with you that he also, that happened in his life when he was going through addiction. And he can tell you a little bit about the start of his addiction too.
All right, so I don't want to go through his whole entire life per se, but what I can tell you is that him and I were very opposite from one another. It was very sports driven. I was more music driven. He was more outgoing, I would say, and I was a little bit less. But that kind of ties this all together because in the end, disease of addiction and alcoholism doesn't really care. It can affect anybody, and my story and his story is proof positive of that. This is something that can affect anybody, any age, gender, it doesn't matter really. So with that being said, Mike and I, growing up, I just never really thought that this would be something that he would fall into. I remember early, because this affected me earlier than him. But then shortly after I started to develop my own problems, he started to develop his own problems. but always separately. It was kind of weird, actually. We never really partook together. It was something that we did separate. So my memory is a little foggy of that time period, and so I don't think I was around him as much when he was experiencing his problems until the end, until I got sober, you know, a number of years ago, and then I was around a lot more, and I got to witness it from the other side of the fence. But he was a great kid. He really was, and had all the promise and talent in the world, and you know, addiction just doesn't care about that. It really doesn't. It will affect anybody, and it's just a real shame. But either way, he was a great kid, and he was very talented too. He, like my mom had said earlier, very driven when it came to sports, very outgoing when it came to friends. He was one of those people that I, I don't know very many people that didn't like him. You know what I mean? He was one of those type of individuals where he just he was the light in the room. He really was. He was liked by almost everybody, and it showed. And he really could make you laugh. He really could make you smile. It didn't really matter what was going on in your life. Having him around just always kind of made things a little better. And I'm not the only one. I think that feels this way. I think if you ask people, 10 people, you're probably going to get the same answer from everybody. He was a special guy. He just had some difference, and yeah, I think that's about what I'm going to touch on right now at this point with Mike.
Yeah. So I want to just kind of take it from where we left off, and that, you know, as Michael got into those college years, we noticed a lot of changes in him. I would say, you know, just distancing himself, withdrawn more from us, just not the Michael you know, and the lies began, and then stealing, and at the time, I mean, I think that he didn't know any other way, because he didn't understand what was happening. He had always said about Anthony, I'll never do that. You know, I watched what my brother did to you and Dad, and I'll never do that, never. And he was so involved with his sports and friends that it didn't. I mean, he was around a lot of, you know, jockey kind of guys, if you will, and it just didn't appear that that was the direction that he would be going. Anthony and his sort of surfacing of the addiction were very different, like Anthony said. We didn't notice a lot with Anthony, and it was our first time to deal with addiction at all. And with Anthony, it was very subtle. The start of it was very subtle. And so when we just never imagined it would happen to Michael, and when it did, it was very much more acute. It came on fast, and it came on hard. Whereas I think Anthony's addiction was very slow and insidious. And if I could have guessed, even in the throes of both of their addictions, who would not get better in the group. And it's a horrible thing to say about both your children, but at the bottom of the barrel I was, and looking, going, which son can I possibly save? Which one's going to possibly make it through this? Anthony's addiction was very different in that he really just couldn't care less. It was as if he didn't really want to come out of the addiction or have the desire that I noticed with Michael, where Michael would come to me crying about it, like, please help me. There's got to be a way to save me. Like, there's got to be a way to fix this, you know, and I hate my life like this. Now, I know Anthony hated his life like that too, but it just, they express themselves different. It comes out different. Both of them are different, and you don't really know what's hitting you when it's happening. You just know you have to help them. I'll kind of finish up the story of Michael, and then we can talk a little bit about, you know, more things to look for, and you know, just some of the resources and so on and so forth. But as Michael's illness sort of took off, and again, it was very, very acute, he actually began using needles, and that's not something I was ever used to, because Anthony had never done that. And that to me was horrifying, because I knew what the recidivism was with someone who's going through recovery after that. So he has, the worst part was he was found by his dad after overdosing in the bathroom. That was our first really it was just shocking to us, and we didn't know what to do. Like, this is something we'd not traveled yet. And so luckily or not luckily, he stopped using the needles over time. He had a couple of overdoses, but he started to begin snorting. Usually that doesn't happen, so this was a little unusual. But again, Michael would crash and burn, is the best way to put it. He would crash and burn. He would get arrested. He would end up, overdosing, whatever the case may be, end up in the hospital, rehab, or jail. And each time Michael came out of it full-fledged, I'm going to go to meetings, I'm going to do this, and he did. And I think Anthony would agree. He really did want to, and he really did try, but it would fizzle. We'd watch it fizzle every time. Now that happens in cases of children going through, recovery, but these were like a high and a low, very, very much a high and a low. And so I'll cut to the chase. We went through 10 years of recovery and overdosing and relapses. And each time he would get himself back up on his feet and get a really good job. And me and my ex say everything he touched, he turned to gold, because he just did. He could turn it around, and he would do whatever he had to do to get there. Whether, I recall the last job, he would Uber just to get there, even though he couldn't drive. He just in that way. But it was slow again. When he would relapse, it would be a slow, you'd start to see those same things I mentioned, sort of just kind of disappearing, not answering his phone as much, just things that weren't his character, and maybe not that bubbly, happy Michael that would run in the room kissing and hugging everybody. It just stopped. It slows down. So about 2 years ago, he actually had a relapse that was pretty severe and lost the love of his life, and after just too many relapses. And he was pretty devastated, but he did pick himself up. He got a great job. He was personal training, sales manager at a gym, very successful. I joined the gym, saw him every day. He was doing wonderfully for at least about a year and a half of that time. Just wonderful. Like, it was excelling in sales, doing great. And I would say in January, we noticed a little bit of a change. Me and my ex-husband, we noticed he wasn't answering the calls as much. He wasn't calling and being as bubbly. There was just that old Michael was coming back. And then the virus hit in March, and they closed the gym, and he started to, I was quarantining with him at my house, and he was doing a lot of pacing and just again withdrawing, and we found out he was drinking. So again, just that slow and insidious disease is creeping back into play. And the night before we found him, that morning before he and I went to the gym with his girlfriend, left the gym, and he decided he was going to go back to his house instead of mine. And his girlfriend called in the morning on the 23rd, just screaming that he was dead. And my son Anthony went out, and we went out and saw his body, and that was rough. Something you never want to go through. But the loss of Michael is, it's just been a tragedy to so many. And it's not just our family. Michael also lost two of his best friends in the last 5 years to overdose addiction. And I think there were many things that he struggled with that he just didn't want to talk about. He always wanted to be happy. He wanted everything to be good, and the world to be shiny, and there wasn't negativity in his world. And I think he kept that all inside when he started to feel he was slipping again. He just didn't feel he could come to us or anyone.
About that day.
Or him?
Well, I can tell you that personally, I've been through a lot myself, and I would say that that day, March 23rd, would probably take the cake as the single worst day. It was unbelievably traumatic, very. I don't even. I still, to be honest with you, don't even know how to really. I don't even know if I've really properly processed the whole thing. It's been 5 months now, and you know, I still can't get the image of my younger brother on the floor dead. Because the whole situation was it was very quick. I'll never forget what happened. I was on my way out the door from my house, and I was getting ready to go to work. And it was about 7:30, and my wife was at home like 8 months or something, and she called me. He's gone, he's dead, he's gone. And I'm like, what, it's like, I haven't even drank coffee yet. Right? I mean, the whole thing was just so bizarre. And from that point going forward, it was just a big blur. I remember picking her up, driving out to the house he was living in, and just seeing things that really nobody should have to see. Witnessing things that morning that I don't think anybody, parent, brother, doesn't matter, that nobody should really have to see. Very difficult to digest and understand, and but also ironically a very sobering moment where you really realize what can happen here, and the consequences of decisions that are made, because there's consequences to every decision, and it was tough. It still is tough, and it's very upsetting. It really is. It's a very upsetting situation, and I still, you'll have to forgive me, I still don't know really how to internalize all of this and then spew it back out for everybody else, because I'm still trying to understand where I'm at with it. But I can tell you off the top of my head right now, it's upsetting, it's disappointing, shame. I wish I could take just 1 or to 2, maybe 5% of what's in my head and put it in his head so that he could have replayed that day and he wouldn't have to go through it. It just sucks, basically, is what it is. It just really stinks. Oh yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
I think we're both our whole family's still in shock. I think we haven't processed it appropriately.
Yeah. And I think that's something, that there's something to be said, with the isolation that, that we're still kind of in, because, even though we're opening up, we're not open. We miss that sense of community, that connection. And so, especially, in the grieving process, I feel, sometimes we get stuck in it too, and so I really appreciate both of you sharing, that story, because I can't imagine how that feels. I know that, like, from my end, I shared with your mom, Anthony, when we talked a few weeks ago, I'm in recovery. I've been sober for almost 5 years. And, had I not had my aha moment, including my slip ups and, eventually getting to where I am now, my mom could just as easily have been, the person sitting here talking to someone like me about it. And so I appreciate so much you guys, sharing this with me. But I want to go a little bit further back toward the beginning, where we talked about how addiction is something that can affect anyone. And I think that that's general knowledge at this point, but still, no matter how hard we try to, share that knowledge, there's still this stigma and shame around it. And so I guess from your perspective, Kathy, like, what can you do, like, as a parent, to share with other parents that, you know, this is something that really isn't the fault of the person who's experienced it. It is a disease. And then Anthony, like, how does it feel? You know, I know like how I felt. Like I was very much ashamed, you know, when I realized I had a problem, and just kind of like how we overcome that, you know, just kind of share a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is probably, to me, the most important topic we can have on this. Obviously, my son's story, I'm not afraid to share, and I've been all over social media and all over websites and anything and anywhere. I've even had a local news channel interview. Anything I can get my voice out there to tell his story, I will. But also, it's coupled with how do we change this? It's not all about, okay, so because we're stuck in stigma, and that is exactly the problem. It's the root of everything. And I do believe my son might be alive today if it weren't for stigma and his shame. He had more shame, and I can't speak for Anthony. I'm quite sure he had shame and was embarrassed. It's not, society has decided to put value on people the way that they pick and choose. And the stigma depicts someone homeless on the street, you know, and yet we're talking about a 31-year-old, wonderful, wonderful young man that was successful, that was had a great personality, had friends, was not anything like the depiction of what an addict or what people like to call junkie would be like. And that is in my travels, which is pretty much every single day, is supporting moms. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but seeing these pictures, these kids, knowing videotapes, we're talking everything you could ever imagine. I'm at the forefront of it more than the police, more than the rehabs. I mean, I'm at the forefront of it with thousands across the nation, millions across the nation. And no one looks like what they say an addict looks like. So the general public that hasn't been affected by this, just, you know, I think it affects is it 2 out of 10? It's something along those lines. It's
2 out of 10.
So think about those people that aren't affected. They've got what they've got in their head, and it's very hard to erase that because it's just been ingrained for so long. And so the only thing that we can do and should do is educate and continue to speak about it. It's one thing I will never be ashamed of with my children. And Anthony can tell you, I've been speaking about it for years, even when they were in and out of recovery. It doesn't matter. We have to talk about it. We have to say their names. We have to bring this up, and we have to change the viewpoint. I just personally think that this is where we've got to focus. We've got to educate. We've got to get resource to the folks out there that need it. Resources, and resources. Support, understanding. We've got to try to rid the shame. The shame is what I believe put Michael in that room that night alone, not telling anyone where his thoughts were going because he was ashamed. He had done so well. We were all so proud of him. And now I'm going to have to tell everybody? No, I'm just going to try to do it and handle it myself.
Yeah. So from the perspective of somebody who is on the flip side, I would say that there is definitely a lot of, well, while you're in it, while you're in addiction, I would say that there is definitely a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, for sure. Those are things you really need to work through if and when you ever get sober. But during while those years were going on for myself, I didn't want anybody to know anything. Period. You know, I didn't want anybody to know anything about me. I was not the type of person to. I was very much a loner, especially towards the end when it came to my addiction. I was afraid of what you might think. I was afraid myself, you know, of what was going on. I definitely didn't want to anybody else to really know the extent of what was happening, and I would do everything in my power to keep that from anybody. And that definitely keeps a person sick for a lot longer. I really don't know, to be honest with you, how to break that cycle. But what I do know is that, you know, especially when you get sober or when you enter into sobriety, those are all things that you have to work through. At this point in my life right now, I don't care who knows about my past or what was going on. You know, that stigma has, I couldn't care less. I really don't. I don't go around parading it, but at the same time, if somebody asks me, I'm definitely not ashamed to help or explain. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people in my life right now that didn't even know me back then. So they would have no clue. Like, my wife didn't even know me back then. She has no idea what kind of a complete lunatic I was back then. But you know, I agree with what you were saying. I agree with what my mom was saying. The stigma is going to hurt more than help. And if you were to look at my brother's like a prime example. If you were to look at him, you would never know in a million years that he was in active addiction. Like, he just did not, like, you know, you think of some dude on the street in some cot, whatever, you know, like whatever these cartoons or whatever movies depict. It's not the case half the time. I mean, it is true in certain situations, but with somebody like him, you would never know. You would never know. He looked like a bodybuilder. You know what I mean? Like, he looked like the last person that would disrespect their mind or their body in that kind of way. Just did not. And it's not just him. There's a lot of people. I know tons of people in recovery and you know, in other parts of my life. They just you would never know. So you know, that stigma that people carry around, oh, he's a dirty drug addict, or oh, he's a, you know, this or that or whatever. You know, that's the kind of response that keeps people ashamed from explaining their reality, because they don't want to be looked at like that. They don't want to have somebody talk to them like that or treat them like that, or they don't want any of that, really. You know, it's hard enough having to carry that around on a daily basis. That's a job in and of itself. And then on top of it, you have society or whoever looking at you, you know, through these glasses. Do you think that really helps? Probably not. So yeah, you know, I can see it. It's interesting in my case because, you know, I spent so many years in that life, and now I've spent almost as many years not on the other side of the fence. So it's very interesting for me sometimes to talk about this topic and look at this topic, because I definitely remember how it was while in it, and then I can also obviously see what's going on now, you know, as I've gotten older and kind of worked through those issues. I can sympathize with both sides of the fence, and you know, it's something that I think needs to change. You know, I don't know how you really go about changing something like that. But yes, I don't think it helps any. No.
And I'm going to add one thing that happened the other day on one of my support sites. A woman shared a text exchange. She's in healthcare. She was a nurse in the emergency department. Shared a text exchange between the emergency medical technicians, the paramedics, about Narcan and giving Narcan. And it was very sad. Talk about stigma. These guys were talking about back and forth about how the Narcan worked too well and should have let it expire so that the kid that they were talking about could have just died. Numerous back and forth just that were mind-blowing, that you can't believe someone that's caring for the general public actually feels this way about this group of people. And it was the saddest thing I've ever seen. I thought we'd gotten a little bit further, but it looks like we're just living back years prior. Very sad.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such, like, it is a sad thing to see it, you know, and you see that sometimes, you see that in schools with sometimes how they teach about drug education, because I'm just thinking back to when I was in middle school and high school, and it was just very much, don't do it because it's bad. They don't really go into any detail. And then, you know, growing up in a faith-based community, you know, kind of, you know, 20 years ago, where it's like, no, no, we just don't talk about that here. It's like a very, you know, that's a you issue that you take home. We don't bring it here. So now, kind of seeing certain groups kind of change. Like I'm in the same church that I was when I was little, and now we're hosting this, you know, month-long event, really trying to push that. And then to go to, like, how do we make that change? We have conversations like this. And, you know, one of my favorite things that people say to me when I share that I'm sober is, "You're too boring to have done anything." I'm not a very exciting person, so it's kind of funny. Like, yeah, like you look at me, I'm like, I'm just quiet, and I'm not really quiet, but you know, so it's interesting to, you know, see those reactions to people, and really, it's important to share stories, and not necessarily, like, and I agree, like, maybe we don't need to have a parade saying, "Hello, we are all addicts here in recovery, and it's fantastic." But at the same time, when someone comes to us and says, "Hey, you know, I heard this about you," and you just say, "Yeah," and it's really great. And I think that that's so important, because it shows that not only, you know, is there hope in recovery, but, you know, these are people around us, um, that are that way. And like, to me, that's really inspiring, and it helped, especially in my first year. I don't know if you experienced this, Anthony, but like a lot of isolation your first year of sobriety, like, you, like, because I lost all of my friends
So
because I just couldn't.
actually opposite for me.
Oh, okay.
What I this was huge for me, and actually, it's funny that you mentioned this, because this is probably one of the biggest things that I think my brother actually didn't do, and I'm like a huge advocate of this. But like, your foundation's everything, right? Because
Mhm.
5 years from now, or 7 years from now, or however long from now, your life is life now at this point, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you got a million things going on, I'm sure. I do too. So what your foundation in the beginning is going to carry you.
Mhm.
It's going to keep carrying you, and how you build that and how strong you build that is everything. I had more fun in the first probably 2 to 3 years of my sobriety than I did before, and probably after. Like, I look back at those first couple of years, and I think, like, man, I had a blast. I seriously had a blast. I acted like a jackass. I went out all the time with my friends. I made tons of new friends. I was at meetings 9 to 12 times a week. You know what I mean? I didn't know what else to do. I had no life, up to that point. Everything changed. I knew that it was either go 100% with this, or I was just gonna either keep going back to jail, or I was gonna die. So I figured, you know what, I might as well give it a shot, and I gave it a shot. And I not only gave it a shot, but I gave it everything I had. So I had a blast, to be honest with you. I'm not saying, your story's different than mine, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. That happens differently for everybody. But I do remember those first couple of years being fantastic. And I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I could have that fun again. Like, it was a blast for me. I remember doing all kinds of stupid stuff, like sober dances and different like sobriety clubs, and like, different places you could go get coffee at. And I don't even know if they're around anymore, who knows, but like we just did all kinds of stuff. And I don't, and then as you get older, people they grow apart, or they, and they go off and have their families and jobs, and things happen. But those foundation years are so important, because I don't know if I would have lasted as long as I have had I not had that in the beginning, because that taught me that I can have fun again. It taught me about life doesn't always have to be so dark. It like, you can really enjoy yourself while doing completely different things than you have been doing for the last 10 years. And I just think that if a lot more people really gave it, if they really had that willingness, you know what I mean? Maybe the stats would be a little different. but
Mhm.
you know, we're all in different places at different times, so it's tough to say. But that was my experience with it, you know.
That's good. I'm jealous. I spent a lot of time by myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
But I mean, like you said, everyone's experience is different. You know, like my friends, their activity was going out and drinking, and I was like, well, I gotta leave by 9 o'clock because anything after 9 is dangerous for me.
right.
Well, and I
So,
think too, thinking about Michael and any of the times he was going through recovery, especially the last one, I think he was different than Anthony's experience. Michael had burned a lot of bridges. Some of those friends were still behind him and supporting, but they all had kids and were married. And Michael had been stunted back to, you know, the earlier time when he began using. So everyone else has progressed. He didn't. He would complain to me like, I don't really have any friends, Mom. You know, I just have these guys in the meetings, but he didn't sustain those meetings. He wanted to be in the world of nobody knowing his shame, sadly.
Yep, back to the whole stigma thing. Pretty much.
it really is this, like, I think it all circles back to that. And sometimes, like, I know, like, in my experience, I hid my issues from my parents for a long time. And I just remember, like, one day, like, I was so worried about what my mom would think about, you know, my problem. But it got to the point where I got in a car accident because I was drunk. And luckily we didn't call the cops, so I didn't get in trouble. But I realized, I'm like, you know, I need some help. And I couldn't wait anymore. And I said, Mom, this is what's going on. And I was so ready for her to say, well, this is disappointing. I can't believe you would do this. Her response instead was just, okay, what do you need? And to me, that was so striking, because I think, like, in my fog, I was projecting my personal stigma, you know, my own feelings about it. I think that's something, like, especially, like, for parents, is like, how do we share that? Like, how do we share that message, like, with our kids, that it's okay to come to us. Like, I am your parent no matter what. You know, you are a parent and you are a new parent. So what kind of message or, you know, learnings can you share about that? You know, making sure that, like, your kids understand, or, you know, children understand and parents understand that being open and listening is so important.
That's an interesting topic.
Well, you know, it's hard because both of my kids did things differently and at different stages. You know, Anthony didn't really ever come to me and say, I want help. I had to go to him and say, you need help. Where Michael would come to me and beg me for help. So I think sometimes when I look back, I have some regrets. Anthony knows this. We've had the discussions. You know, I spent the last 17 years trying to figure out, what does a parent do with two kids that are suffering this disease? I don't know any other way. This is all I know as a parent. I don't know how to be a parent to adult kids. And so Anthony knows that since Michael died, and Anthony's very self-sufficient, you know, raising a child, he's married, he's wonderfully successful, couldn't be more proud of him. He doesn't need me like that, like a parent, but that's all I've known. And all I've known is how to help. So I would say, you know, as a parent, if you encounter this, always be prepared to help your kids as long as they want the help. And when they don't, you need to talk with them. You need to have an open line of communication, and you need to, you know, don't give up. You know, don't give up, because I've got proof right here of what happens when you don't give up. Now, I will tell you, I gave him a little tough love about into those last 3 years of over 10 years of addiction. And like I said, he wasn't exactly receptive to getting better. And so at one point I was kind of like, and he was homeless. I mean, there was nothing I could do. And tough love came into play. I think I went through those 10 years of going, try this, don't try that. That didn't work. Okay, let's try this. I beat myself up. I've beaten myself up for 17 years. So what did I do as a parent? So I think we need to be very mindful that this is not your fault. There is a big hereditary component to it, as we all know, and some people have it and we don't even know why. And so I think it's really important as a parent to just be open-minded, to educate yourself, to understand the disease and know that it's a brain disease, to be open to helping your kids and don't give up on your kids. They relapse many times before they ever get sober. How many times would you say you relapsed?
A lot.
I mean, for 10 years. I mean, you know, and you just can't give up on them. You just can't. And I'd like to, at some point, I'll let him talk about, you know, what he wants to do with his own child now that he's a father, but we need to talk about parents out there with kids now and what to be afraid of.
So this topic's fantastic, and I'll preface it by saying I don't like talking about things generally because I don't want to speak for anybody else. But in my situation, with me, it seems to me, looking back in retrospect, that the only thing that really worked was when people started to step away and say, you know what, fine, then you figure it out. And then I started to freak, because then I don't have the safety nets under me anymore. Because my parents were both her and my dad were both very involved in, I would say I don't want to say that they made mistakes by helping too much or being there too much, but coming from an addict's perspective, or an alcoholic, or whatever you want to call it, that kind of perspective, if there's something out there and your hand's out, I'm going to take it. Okay? I'm going to take anything free given to me, and I'm going to exploit it for as long as I can until it's no longer there anymore. That's me. I'm not speaking for everybody. That's just how I am. I'm going to assume that a lot of people out there, or whoever's watching this, is probably like it. So when those things start to dry up, and when your options become minimized, that's when I feel, at least in my case, that was when I really started to see that I needed to change, to see things for really what they were and what they were at the time, and then you know, ultimately make the decision. Okay, well, you know, something needs to change here. And you know, with me, in my case, it took a lot. It took me, you know, being arrested many times, going to jail many times, going to rehab many times, losing everything many times, being homeless, all these things, these storybook type of things that you hear about addicts and alcoholics, and those were all things that happened to me. And you know, but I remember mom and dad always being there for the most part, and when mom and dad really weren't there anymore, that's when it was time to really take a hard look. And you know, when you don't have options anymore, and you don't have a home anymore, and you don't really have any place to go, or any money, or any job, or anything, and then it's that fight or flight type of thing going on at that point. You know, then you got to figure out what you're going to do. You going to live like this forever, or are you going to try to make a change? Because see, AA was, or not, I don't want to make this an AA thing, but health in some sort of a way was introduced to me very early on, and it took me, I think, like 9 or 10 years after that point to finally give it a shot. So I knew all along that there was help. I knew all along that there was an answer. I was just too stubborn and not ready at any of throughout you know, along the way, to really do anything about it. For my own kid, I don't know what I'm going to do right now because she's 4 months, but I can tell you, if nothing changes and I still feel this way in 15 to 20 years, if she has an issue and I notice it, I don't want to say I hate to say it, but I definitely think that I would probably be a little rough around the edges. Because I think that yields a better result. I really do. I think that letting the person know that you're there to help, and giving them the help if they're willing to take it, but not to the point where they feel like they can exploit it and you're going to be there no matter, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's okay to help a child. It's okay to help somebody in need, but only if they're going to help themselves, right? You got to help yourself. So if you're making this, if you're doing the necessary things to take steps in the right direction, I'm going to help you. And you're going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay. But if I feel like I'm being used, abused, and I'm just, you got to pull the plug at some point. So I don't know how to properly answer your question, but I would say that I'll help to a certain extent, but to the point where I feel like my help is being exploited, then you got to show them tough love.
Yeah.
Oh.
I don't know, Kathy, you wanted to talk a little bit more about, parents right now, what signs to look for, what to do when you start to notice those things.
Yeah, and also about what's happening in the world of addiction and what we're calling overdose, but really truly isn't. Anthony was right on when he said, you have to, you can't exploit the help and you need to want the help. I learned the hard way that, when someone comes to you and says, I want help, I'm willing to get help, I want to do this, it's a lot different than having to force someone's hand. I mean, you can try, and the addict's mind, unfortunately, is a little bit younger than their actual age, because when they start using, that's where they're kind of leave off. So it's getting them that kind of window of sobriety to make sense out of what they need and what they don't need. So sometimes in cases where you can make that difference and you're not being forced and it's maybe hasn't been happening over and over and over and over again, then yeah, you need to do that and you need to really guide their hand. What I wanted to talk about was where we are right now in 2020 and even in the last 10 years. It's very important to me to talk about this because I've been obviously in the throes of this for 17 years, but I've really been acting as an advocate and a support to others and heavily involved in the world as we know it of parenting an addict. And what we know today is that there's a major game changer going on. These kids that are dying, and we're hearing about them, they're 200 per day now, are not dying. I think it's 85% now that are not dying of an overdose per se, meaning pure street drug, pure heroin, pure cocaine, pure, Xanax, whatever your drug of choice is. What's happening today is they go to buy their drug of choice, whether that be Xanax, Percocet, an opioid, and the lacing it is with fentanyl and carfentanil. It's synthetically made, and I'm not going to try to do too much education, but fentanyl is a drug used in healthcare that they have somehow figured out how to synthetically make it based on the components of what it's made of, and very cheaply. It gives a high that's like no other, and if you're lucky, you'll survive it. What the addict thinks when they get the heroin is that they're getting heroin, and if they survive it, they think, wow, that was mind-blowing, right? But they got lucky that time because maybe there was a granule versus the two that are going to kill you. They don't even know that. So what's happening now is they're lacing everything. I know mothers who have lost their children to smoking pot off the streets. The dealers that they're getting these drugs from are putting this in everything. And that's why we're seeing a huge increase. We're no longer seeing overdose or needles at the scene. We're seeing people just gone from just a drug, just getting a Percocet thinking they're going to get a quick high. Their friend tells them, hey, I got a Xanax for you. Or maybe they have ecstasy. That's another one they like to put it in. So what I want to warn parents of is you've got to start talking to your children immediately at the youngest age you can think of, and not, we don't want you to do drugs. Drugs are dangerous. There are there are components in the drugs today that will kill you. It's not the drugs you know and you've talked about or heard your friends talk about anymore. And so that to me is something that today we have to drive home. We've got to, that's where stigma's got to go by the wayside so that we can truly get the word out and get it out there in an appropriate way so that everyone understands it.
Yeah. And that was something that in our last session, Carol Negus, who's the director of nursing for Stella Maris, did touch on that a fair amount, you know, and to paraphrase what she said is, if you think you're getting, you know, Percocet on the street, you're not. If you think you're getting this, you're not. If it looks like it, it's not. And then, of course, you know, we had Dr. Perrin kind of go through what happens if you overdose on different drugs. You know, if you overdose on marijuana, you get a little hungry. If you overdose on alcohol, you may throw up and feel really sick in the morning. And if you overdose on opioids or get fentanyl or carfentanil, you're going to die.
Yeah.
Like it's very morbid and it sounds like fear mongering, but it's the truth. And I think that that's something that people don't recognize, because not only is there a stigma against people who have addiction, there's this perception that drugs are okay.
Yeah.
Like, well, you know, when I was a kid, you know, you could experiment and it was fine. It's not that way anymore.
No.
And I think like we have an opportunity as citizens to, you know, ask our lawmakers to do a little bit more. And I know that's something that you're very passionate about. If you wanted to talk about that a little bit, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
This is, since Michael died, initially it was shock and just curl up in a ball and not leave my bed, not wanting to do anything and just really getting through the day by a drop of the hat. I don't even know how I did. And something kicked in maybe 2 to 3 months in where I thought, I can't let him die in vain. I won't. I'll talk about him. I will keep posting about him. I will tell his story. I'll put his picture. I will do whatever I can. And as I began to do this, and it was very strange, for the last 10 years, like I mentioned, I've been an administrator or moderator on websites on Facebook. And I'd like to talk about that because I want to make sure any parents that are listening know there's tons of support out there that you wouldn't even know about. And so I had found out that little world that was kind of hidden. They're all private sites, and had been doing that for years. I stepped away from that when Michael got sober and was doing good about 2 years ago. And then after he died, and like I said, a couple months in, when I decided I needed to really grieve, get support, see what's going on out there and try to make change, I sort of, it's like, oh, honestly, it's like opening a second Facebook door. It's bizarre, but there are, off the top of my head, I could throw out 10 to 15 sites that exist nationally that are either a grief support.
You're talking about Facebook.
Yeah, these are Facebook groups, but most of them have an online, open, public page as well. But where the talking and the discussions are and the learning and the sharing is in the private groups. And so these groups are a place where you can go to get support or just grieve, or you can go to try to make change. And there's a couple that have just recently surfaced that I got involved in. I'm now partnering with a gal that started a group called Parent and Family Movement Against Lethal Drugs. She started late 2019. And I reached out to her and we started talking about our objectives of trying to make change and how do we make change and what are the things we can do. And so we were completely in line. I mean, we were motivating each other. We immediately clicked. She has been trying to do this on her own. She was opening all kinds of state chapters, Ohio, Michigan, every single state. And I said, let me help you. Well, I helped her and marketed. We went from 400 members to today we're over 1,050. And that took just a month. That's how necessary it was. And that's how many parents out there really wanted to learn what can they do to make change. This is a great group. It's got state chapters. Some of them are smaller because we just got them started. There's other groups out there. There are ones, like I said, that are just support. There's something called Team Share, which is really good. There's the Addict's Mom. drug-induced homicide, which is a very good one, which got me motivated. And so we're all trying to work towards the same thing. And what that is really getting the word out, decreasing the stigma, talking about it, bringing up our children, not being ashamed. We've got to stop being ashamed. Somebody asked me today, why can't we make this page public? The one that we're currently private with over 1,000 members. And I said, yeah, agreed. But the problem is there's a lot of moms and dads out there and even siblings that they want to stay anonymous. They don't want to get backlash. I've actually commented on sites that are out there and gotten beat up. Like, your son was an addict. Let him die anyway. I've had some of the most mean and hateful things said to me that you could ever imagine. And I don't care. I've got tough shoulders, but some people don't. So on those sites, we're talking a lot about the things we can do to make change. Again, it's about getting it out there. Post on your Facebook page, post on social media, talk about it. The other thing is we're writing politicians, writing to your governor, writing to your representatives of your state. In our state, the gal I partner with on this website actually beat down the doors to get to Jim Jordan, and he did meet with her. They had a great discussion. That was about a month ago, and he's actually letting her know now he'd like her to work with, I'm not sure who it was, his administrator that's going to help to write some of these grants and laws. So I'm going to work with her on that. Additionally, I beat down doors to get that Channel 5 news interview. I mean, it wasn't like they called me. I emailed them numerous times. I made them look at my son's pictures. I called. And that's also something you can do. Band together with people that are local. If you can, get on these sites and find out who lives in your area. Just last night, I met with 5 women that live up in the Lake County, Cuyahoga County area. And we're all talking about some things we might want to do. Those are calls. They're, again, writing to even the president's wife, Melania, is very involved heavily with the addiction topic. And so she's a perfect person to write. It's also an election time. So right now, this is the time we need to make our voices heard. I want to say one other thing. My ex-husband and I met with the sergeant of Cuyahoga County on Friday. And it was very disappointing. It's very sad, the structure and the way it's set up. My son will likely never have justice for his case. It's still an open investigation, but from what we were told, nothing. And that's because it's almost impossible, even if you know the person that did it and you've got proof, it's almost impossible to convict. We don't have a drug-induced homicide law in Ohio. That's another thing. The lesser conviction, I don't recall what it's called, maybe manslaughter, doesn't get them much time either. There can't be a middleman. So if somebody gave it to Michael, but they're not the dealer, nothing happens. But that's the way the laws are structured. And then in addition to that, the way the police task force is structured is a huge hurdle as well. And so what I've done and what other parents can do is I've asked to talk to the representatives that make those decisions. So I've asked the sergeant to please get back with me on the names of people that I can talk to, sit down on a board, get on your local boards, mental health boards, your legal community boards, whatever it is you can do, but don't stop talking about it. You got anything you want to?
This is your area.
He knows how passionate I am about this, because we're not going to make change unless we make change.
Absolutely. And listening to Dr. Jim Sarratt's talk on Saturday night, he shared, when his son passed away from overdose, that they tried to prosecute. They said, I'm a doctor, and if I prescribe someone a medicine and it treats something that doesn't exist, I lose my license, I get in trouble. Why are we treating a dealer differently? And I thought that was, an interesting thing. So there, I think the more collective voices that are, sharing stories and sharing frustration, and really, like you said, beating down doors until they listen, is really important to do. And I think, for others, I think just taking a deep breath and diving into the pool of just sharing their story. It can even start with just a sentence, like, I have a story. I'm not ready to tell it to you yet, but I have one, as simple as that. It's getting kind of late, so I don't want to keep you guys much longer. I thought it would be kind of nice, one of the things that I remember about Mike, I went to high school with him. I graduated with him. We had a lot of classes together. And something that you mentioned when you posted about him is how he loved to sing pop songs.
Yes, he did.
If you were to describe Michael in a song, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. Like what song you mean would
Yeah,
describe
what song
that the Katy Perry song Firework, I think, was the one that reminds me of him, because is that the name of it? I can't remember. Yeah, and I remember him singing it at the top of his lungs. So, and he was like a firework. I mean, he was so filled with life and so kind. I think though funny, but just filled with life and kind are the two things that I think of. He just always had everyone else's interest in mind. And I think that's what I miss. I miss his hugs. I miss him singing and acting goofy. But yeah, I don't know. What about you? Your music genre is not.
You're a music guy. You gotta have some.
You don't want to know.
And I do not listen to the same kind of music.
No.
His singing was just annoying. But it's not even just for me. It wasn't even just about a song. He had a lot of life in him, So I couldn't even name you one specific song. It didn't matter whatever top 40 radio thing was going on. He would just spout it off, and I'm like, dude, what do you do all day long? You just listen to like.
Well, teaching.
Yeah, training. Like 96.5 all day long. Like, what is your deal?
Do you remember when he made fun of trees and like bodily sneeze really bad? Yeah, he just liked to make us laugh.
Yeah.
But I can't. I mean, that one stands out for me just because I don't know why.
He did like Katy Perry.
Yeah, he loved Katy Perry. And Taylor Swift.
Loved Taylor Swift.
Oh, and Halsey. Loved Halsey.
All right. So in closing, is there anything else that you want to share, with our, Northeast Ohio community and beyond? Any words of wisdom, any words of support, any call to action?
No, I just reiterating what we just talked about. Go on, if you I know you're not a Facebook fan, you don't have to look at your timeline. Go on and get support. If you I mean, the sharing of information we have on those sites, it's taught me a lot, and it's helped support me to know others have gone through the same thing, to connect with people. You're not alone. There's support out there. There are so many of us going through this, but because of the stigma and the fact that we don't talk about it and we're ashamed, that's why we're in these little private groups. And my hopes is that we can just start talking about it openly everywhere.
Yeah, and on the other side of things, for the person that might actually be living in the hell that is addiction, there's all kinds of help out there. There really is. You just have to be willing to take that step to go in that direction. I'm not here to promote any specific group or anything, but there's different types. There's, if you want to go the AA route, there's AA. If you feel like you need to go to rehab, there's rehabs that take insurance. There's charity-driven rehabs. There's all kinds of different rehab. I've been to all of them. At some point in my life, and if none of those things are what you need, or what you need at that specific time, there's IOP programs. There's even just talking to a friend, even just talking to somebody that you trust, just being open and honest about it, because things are different now, especially if you're dabbling in the drug world. I mean, like you guys were talking about just a short time ago. I mean, if you think you're getting something, you're probably not. I don't think I would even be alive right now if I hadn't gotten out of it when I got out of it, because it's just different now, and this kind of stuff just wasn't really common at that point for me. So I'm very, very lucky to even be able to do something like this right now, because I'd probably be in Michael's position too. But those are all suggestions and things that you can do if you need the help. Talk to somebody. Don't be afraid. There's a million people out there who are going through the same thing. Some worse, some better, some the same. There's just so many different avenues. You don't have to keep it inside. You don't have to hide it. You don't have to deal with that kind of shame, because that's the stuff that keeps the problem going on longer and longer. That's what I got.
And I'll say one last thing, and then I'm going to shut up. Anthony said, that he was lucky, but what people out there need to know is this man next to me worked for every single thing. He's worked his ass off. Sorry, I probably can't say that. To get where he is today. He's my hero. I would never have thought years ago that I'd be sitting here next to him having this discussion. So don't give up on your kids. Stand by them and really just try to keep them safe as best you can, and don't blame yourself if you can't.